All right, so using our tablets today, we're going to paint this into a believable looking cloud. Now, we've built it up from the ground up. We painted a gradation with our gradation fill here from light blue to dark blue, and I actually stole those blues from my cloud reference. And then I took a cloud that was fairly large resolution. I think I did 8 megapixels or so, and I rolled it out. So I softened it, but clouds are generally fairly soft, so that's okay. And I rolled it out and scaled it up so it filled most of the space of my frame. And then the space of my frame is filled with my creature. So this is my cleaned up assignment to PNG. And then I used my magic wand, very important skill to be able to move selections, with contiguous turned off, so it got all of these little undercut spaces. And I selected around it, let me make sure I'm on the right layer, selected around my creature, because Photoshop's very good at selecting truly empty space. It won't make any mistakes. And then I moved up to my cloud, and it moves the selection with me. So now that that layer is selected, I can then select the inverse. If I don't select the inverse and I duplicate it now, it will leave a big hole the shape of my creature in the cloud. But I want instead for it to be like a cookie cutter and the inside of the cookie cutter. So I'm going to say select inverse, and now you see the dancing ants are not on the outside anymore, only on the inside, and then duplicate with Command J. And now I have a cutout of my cloud creature. And then, to make it even better, when I have that outside selected, I can go to Refine Edge, and I can shift the edge up a little bit, smooth it a little bit, feather it quite a bit to soften that edge. So that takes the selection from being just splitting between 2 pixels evenly, and it will soften and feather the selection. So you'll see that here, and since I'm selecting the outside space and deleting away from it, it's going to make that shape a little bit softer. And the more I hit delete, the softer it will become. Then I'd simply put that above my sky layer that I painted, and I have a nice cutout. So I can show you that softening. I could just keep going with delete and letting it soften and soften and soften. And it feathers it. But it's still way too crisp to feel like a believable cloud. All right, so that's where I am. The next step I'm going to do is take my creature layer and move it up to the very top, above all my cloud reference. Then I'm going to shrink it down into a corner. I think I'll probably do the bottom right corner, holding down Shift so it doesn't distort. And that will help me remember what I'm going for, what illusion I'm trying to get with my cloud design. Okay, it's a good time to check your resolution. You want it to be large. Mine's maybe even a little too large, and I might shrink it slightly because the largest we can print is 13 by 19 inches. So there's really no reason that my height should be anything more than 13. And at 350 pixels per inch. Now notice I have the parameters locked here, so it won't squeeze or distort my image, but I do have resample checked so that I can lessen the number of pixels. And that's going to help me because I'm working at a file that's already 1.5 gigs large in terms of memory, and I'm only going to be adding more data with painting. So you don't need it to be flattened to be more than 100 megabytes. But it should always be something that fits within a 13 by 19 inch page at 350 pixels per inch. That's as big as we need to get in this class. And that shrunk it from being 1.5 gigs with all its layers to being just under a gig. So that will be helpful. All right, now I have my different cloud layers. So the easiest way, let me go ahead and lock this guy so I don't accidentally paint on that layer so I can turn it on and off easily. Now I'm going to use some of my reference layers and I'm going to select out the clouds. And this is just review. How do you get good selections? Well, I'm going to turn on contiguous for my magic wand. And I'm going to make my tolerance a little bit higher than 32, maybe something more like 62. And select some of these blues. Hold down Shift, select some of these blues around. Now the reason I have contiguous turned on is because I do not want to select the blues or the grays that are similar within the cloud. I want the cloud to have integrity inside. But I do want these edges off. And so when I go too far, I hit Command Z, and then I can just delete those out. And then I can add to it some more. And I can use Refine Edge. Again, I have it on Remember Settings. And I can feather these even more. And have it remember, so I don't end up with lots of just stray pixels. Remember, if you don't do Refine Edge, it's going to cut right at the pixel, and you're going to see those stair-stepped edges, which then you have to erase from. But if you do Refine Edge and feather, it will soften them out, just like that. Not that there's not going to be little things you'll still want to delete, but that it will also get rid of little debris that's floating around. Okay, now I have this cloud. I could, of course, use my 100% opacity soft eraser, fairly large, and I can get rid of some of these things. But real clouds have them too, so I'm not too concerned about that. Basically, this is like having a new piece of Play-Doh that now I want to shape onto my creature and play with. And some parts of it are better than others. I don't want all of this. I definitely don't want this hard edge at the bottom that I didn't soften out. And I don't need it to fill my whole creature like the cookie cutter dough that I made. I can even just soften the edges a little bit more generally. But I might look at this reference and think, okay, where would this suit my character? And now I'm going to use Command T and transform. And while I'm doing that, I might take its opacity down to about 50%. So I can see where it overlaps with my creature. Okay, maybe a little bit more like 70%. And I'm going to use one of my favorite tools, the Warp tool. Now I have to use it conservatively here, because if I warp too strongly, I'll warp the light logic on the cloud. Clouds need to have shadows underneath, and those shadows need to be fairly horizontal to make sense. So I'm going to work along the back edge of my creature here. But I need to keep that shadow fairly horizontal. If I make it too wonky, it won't work anymore. And I definitely want to get his arm there. I like that that shadow is kind of underneath where his arm overlaps. That's going to help sell that illusion of an arm coming forward from my silhouette. So I hit return. I can go back to 100% opacity. And I can play with blending it in. And the easiest way to do this kind of rough blending is with your eraser at 100% opacity, but very soft edged and large. I know I don't need it out here. Go right to the edge. Definitely soften any hard edges. I like this kind of darkness around what might be his nose. I'm reminding myself of the shape with my creature down there. And because clouds are so soft and transparent, any hard edge is going to be problematic later. And I actually like what it's doing with the sky there, between the legs. But I don't want any blues that are darker than the blues I painted for myself. At least not yet. Okay, now this is where it gets kind of fun and is a lot more like digital painting. So I have a nice big reference. I like what it's doing in some places. I like the kind of dark band here, which kind of suggests maybe a bit of a head. But I need that kind of dark band on the thigh there. If I squint and I see the value that really makes my character look like it's moving, I need that kind of dark down here. So how can I do that? Well, I do a layer above, and I'm going to label this layer clone stamp. I always recommend you do clone stamp on an extra layer above the others, so that you're not replacing your pixels as you clone stamp, because it's a very powerful tool. I'm going to mark that layer red, and I'm going to move to the clone stamp tool. I'm going to set it very similar to the way I set my eraser. So large, but very soft-edged, pressure sensitive, and at an opacity that's not quite 100%, but still pretty opaque. So I'll do something like 70 to 75. Okay, how do you use the clone stamp? Just quick review. Hold down Option, and you'll target the area you want. So I want this dark shadow. And then where do I want it? I want it right here. So I target it with Option, then I let go of Option, and I'm able to paint with that shadow texture. And I'm painting the inner thigh of my creature's leg with cloud texture. I'm not going to worry too much about the outside edge quite yet. Where else do I need that? I need it under the tail, right here. But I need it to be more horizontal, because clouds have horizontal shadows more often than another type. And so I might use a little bit of this to break into it. So I'm stealing from different parts of the cloud to make up these textures. Where do I have strong highlights? Well, I have it on the claw there. Even looks like I have 3 claws on that, so I'm going to leave that cloud the way it is. But I also want some strong highlights around his horns. So this might be some good reference for that. Steal that, put it in. Now I'm not drawing with it. I'm just painting raw material. And then I can soften and transition between by using lower opacity clouds where I need them. And how do I do that? I just take my opacity on clone stamp down, and I have this very soft brush that's going to do a lot of it for me. Now notice clouds move in big groups generally. So you're not going to have lots of fussy little detail. And if you find that you're getting that, like if I try to do an eye in too detailed a way. So for instance, if I copy this highlight in a pretty bold and specific way for his upper eyelid, and then keep that shadow for his lower eyelid, and then I kind of outline it with something light again like this. That's going to look a little odd for a cloud. But then if I want to soften it up, even though I did the right thing by using clone stamp, and up close it will have those nice soft edges, I can now use the smudge tool, if you remember that, at a fairly strong strength, like I'd say between 30 and 50. Nice and big soft brush, and I can kind of push like the wind pushing on the clouds, just gentle nudges. I can push it one way or the other, because clouds, if nothing else, are directional. One of their edges is softer than the other. And the more you use this, the more it will soften. Right? And then if I still think that contrast is too strong and it's too heavy-handed, I go back to my clone stamp tool at a low opacity there, and I'm just going to hit it with an overall kind of glaze of lower opacity clouds. So you just kind of work it back and forth that way. This gets you really used to how digital painting works, where you're defining your shapes, but then you refine your edges over and over. I even want a little peak of the blue sky coming through for that eye. So very subtle. Looks a little like a chicken head right now. And then if the whole thing needs to be pushed up, I could even go for a larger smudge tool. And all of this is on my clone stamp layer, so I'm just smudging my clone stamp. I just pushed it all up a little bit, let it process. It's a lot of pixels. But that's the big detraction of the clone stamp tool, or the smudge tool rather, is it takes a long time to process. But see how it shifted that eye up a little bit in a way I like. And I can tilt it this way a little bit. I can even just use transform tools and warp my clone stamps alone, kind of stretch them and soften them. Now, we know that shape is everything. The silhouette is everything.